Random House Audio presents The Republican Noise Machine, Right-Wing Media and How It Corrupts Democracy, by David Brock. This is David Brock. Since defecting from the Republican Party in the latter half of the 1990s and publishing a confessional memoir in 2002, I've discussed my right-wing past with politicians, political activists and strategists, academic scholars, student groups, fellow writers, and hundreds of readers of my book, Blinded by the Right, The Conscience of an Ex-Conservative. I'm rarely asked anymore why I changed or about the Baroque intricacies of the anti-Clinton movement, which I once participated in and then renounced and exposed. After a presidential election decided by the Supreme Court, the terrorist attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001, and the war with Iraq, politics has moved to a different place. Nowadays, when I talk about Blinded by the Right, people want to know not how I was blinded by the right, but how so much of the country seems to be in that position. For the first time since 1929, the Republican Party controls all three branches of government. Fewer people identify with the Democratic Party today than at any time since the New Deal. Conservatism seems the prevailing political and intellectual current, while liberalism seems a fringe dispensation of a few aging professors and Hollywood celebrities. People ask me, a former insider, how the Republican right has won political and ideological power with such seeming ease, and why Democrats, despite winning the most votes in the last three presidential elections, seem to be caught in a downward spiral, still able to win at the ballot box but steadily losing the battle for hearts and minds. While it's not the only answer, my answer is, it's the media, stupid. When I say this, in a more respectful way, to folks outside the right wing, I usually get either of two responses. Those who receive their news from the New York Times and National Public Radio give me blank stares. They are living in a rarefied media culture, one that prizes accuracy, fairness, and civility, that is no longer representative of the media as a whole. Those who have heard snippets of Rush Limbaugh's radio show, have caught a glimpse of Bill O'Reilly's temper tantrums on the Fox News Channel, or occasionally peruse the editorials in the Wall Street Journal, think I'm a Cassandra. They view this media as self-discrediting and therefore irrelevant. They are living in a vacuum of denial. Those who understand what I mean are either members of the media itself, have read media criticism books or internet sites devoted to the subject, or are in the political trenches every day dealing with the media. The gap between those who recognize right-wing media power for what it is and those who don't is wide and deep, as if they inhabit parallel universes. The gap is dangerous to democracy and needs to be closed. When I came to Washington fresh out of college in 1986, I got a job at the Washington Times, the right-wing newspaper bankrolled by Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the Korean-born leader of a religious cult called the Unification Church. Though Moon's paper was said to be read in the Reagan White House, nobody paid much attention to it. We were the proverbial voice in the wilderness. Considering that the paper was governed by a calculatedly unfair political bias, and that its journalistic ethics were close to nil, this was a good thing. That was 18 years ago. Today, the most important sectors of the political media, most of cable TV news, the majority of popular op-ed columns, almost all of talk radio, a substantial chunk of the book market, and many of the highest traffic websites, reflect more closely the political and journalistic values of the Washington Times than those of the New York Times. That is, they are powerful propaganda organs of the Republican Party. For our politics, this development in the media represents a structural change, a structural advantage for the GOP and conservatism, and, I believe, the greatest structural obstacle facing opponents of the right wing. I therefore think it is one of the most important political stories of the era. I have sought to tell this story in The Republican Noise Machine, Right-Wing Media and How It Corrupts Democracy. I know there is a Republican noise machine because I was once part of it. From the Washington Times to a stint as a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, the right's premier think tank, to a position as an investigative writer at the muckraking magazine The American Spectator, and as the author of a best-selling right-wing book, I forwarded the right-wing agenda not as an open political operative or advocate, but under the guise of journalism and punditry, fueled by huge sums of money from right-wing billionaires, foundations, and self-interested corporations. By the time I said goodbye to the right wing in 1997, what was once a voice in the wilderness was drowning out competing voices across all media channels. The most influential political commentator in America, Rush Limbaugh, and his hundreds of imitators, saturated every media market in the country, providing 22% of Americans, not only conservatives but independent swing voters, with their primary source of news. In the 2000 presidential campaign, the Republican noise machine, which worked for years to convince Americans that the Clintons were criminally minded, used the same techniques of character assassination to turn the Democratic standard-bearer, Al Gore, for many years seen as an overly earnest Boy Scout, into a liar. When Republican National Committee polling showed that the Republicans would lose the election to the Democrats on the issues, a skillful and sustained 18-month campaign by Republicans to portray the vice president as flawed and untrustworthy was adopted, the New York Times reported. Republicans accused Gore of saying things he never said, most infamously that he invented the Internet, a claim he never made that was first attributed to him in a GOP press release before it coursed through the media. Actually, Gore had said, "During my service in the United States Congress, I took the initiative in creating the Internet," a claim that even former House Speaker Newt Gingrich verified as true. The well-orchestrated media cacophony had its intended effect. The election was far more competitive than it should have been, and indeed was decided before the Supreme Court stepped in because of negative voter perceptions of Gore's honesty and trustworthiness. While Bush shaded the truth and misstated facts throughout the campaign on everything from the size of Gore's federal spending proposals to his own record as governor of Texas, by substantial margins voters thought Bush was more truthful than Gore. According to an ABC exit poll, of personal qualities that mattered most to voters, 24% ranked honest, trustworthy first, and they went for Bush over Gore by a margin of 80% to 15%. 74% of voters said, quote, Gore would say anything, while 58% thought Bush would. Among white, college-educated male voters, Gore's untruthfulness was cited overwhelmingly as a reason not to vote for him, far more than any other reason. The Republican noise machine is primed to run the same campaign of personal vilification in the 2004 presidential election, no matter which Democrat wins nomination. An op-ed piece in the Washington Post by Charles Krauthammer pronounced former Vermont Governor Howard Dean the delusional Dean. Krauthammer's diagnosis rested on a transcript of a Dean appearance on MSNBC's Hardball with Chris Matthews. Through the use of ellipses, Krauthammer doctored the transcript to make his point. As Gore's experience demonstrated, Democrats ignore these attacks at their peril. Not only do such attacks confirm the preconceptions of Republicans, but they shape the thinking of undecided voters and even of Democrats. One of the most frightening experiences I have had in recent years in talking with rank-and-file Democrats is the extent to which they unconsciously internalize right-wing propaganda. To add insult to injury, too many Democrats have a tendency to blame the victims of these smears, their own leaders, rather than addressing the root of the problem. With the right-wing media now a seemingly permanent and defining feature of the media landscape, if Democrats cut through the propaganda and win back the White House in 2004, they still face the prospect of being brutally slammed and systematically slandered in such a way that will make governing exceedingly difficult. There should be no doubt that the right-wing media's wildings of 1993, which led to Clinton's impeachment 4 years later, will be replayed over and over again until its capacities to spread filth are somehow eradicated. Ironically, though not coincidentally, the radical transformation of the media has been obscured by conservative charges of liberal media bias that are believed by the vast majority of the public, including about half of Democrats. But the liberal media mantra aside, if one looks and listens closely to what the right wing says when it thinks others may not be paying attention, there should be no doubt that it has made potent political gains not despite the media, but through it. In a syndicated column titled Culture Wars Signals, John Leo of U.S. News and World Report argued that a corner has been turned in the culture wars with the rise of a large crop of commentators the left has not been able to match, and conservative gains in new media like the Fox News Channel. Conservative New York Times columnist David Brooks has written that the conservative media have cohered to form a dazzlingly efficient ideological delivery system that swamps liberal efforts to get their ideas out.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?